Hello, and welcome to Quarters on the Quarter. This quarter, we're going to discuss employee engagement. And for the next quarter of an hour, 15 minutes, in April of 2018, more specifically, we're going to talk about employee engagement from the very beginning, the hiring process and the onboarding process. But actually, we're going to take it a step back even further, and we're going to talk about it from the perspective of the job creation process, even before hiring is considered. But before we talk about that, we need to get straight on two specific things within our company and the difference between these two things: vision and culture. Vision is your map, the way you see your business, or more specifically, where you see your company going. Culture is what you have in place to support that vision: your people, your systems, more importantly, the environment that you have in place that takes you there. What is the culture of your organization, and does it lead you towards your vision? Hiring needs to support both the vision and the culture. You know, it's often said that people quit a boss, but there may be truth to that. But I would say, what about a difference in expectations? So for instance, a person's hired with the expectations of what a job entails, but the boss, the department head, the line supervisor, the manager had a different expectation. Where did the breakdown occur? Was there a breakdown in the way the job description and the hiring process occurred? I mean, if it's a smaller company, it's more intimate, so maybe there's more direct involvement from, higher level staff. But the larger the company, the more apt these breakdowns can occur. So if there was a difference in expectations between the hire, the new employee, and the manager, well then sure, it probably would lead to a failure in the hiring process. Either the person wouldn't fit the job or the person would leave in a short amount of time. So when we look at the hiring process, we have to look at where it starts. Many people think that the hiring starts at the interview process. That's where we really get to learn about someone. Some people who are a little bit more progressive will think, well, no, before I even get to that point, I have to look at resumes. I have to evaluate resumes, narrow the pool down, and then interview those folks that seem to qualify. Both of those are very important steps, but I would submit that it starts at job design. Not just description and creation, right? It starts at the way you design your job. So again, we can describe a job, but before we do that, we have to design that. And to be incredibly candid about this, most of us are terrible at job design. It often starts with a list of tasks that we want to have accomplished. And when we break it down into individual tasks, is it really a job or is it a checklist? No consideration is ever given to what the person has to do. In their book, Build It, Glenn Elliott and Deborah Corey suggest asking 3 questions when you're creating a position. First, how will someone feel when doing this job? Second, can I imagine a person will enjoy it and find it fulfilling? And third, where can I see this job developing? I added a fourth. Here's the fourth question that I would ask in this. How does this role connect to our mission? And does it at all? So what is a job that fosters employee engagement? It's one that needs skills, those that are not only executed, but they have the potential to learn new ones. It should be challenging. They should feel that they're accomplishing something meaningful. They should be stimulated by it. It should provide freedom and autonomy, and they should not feel like they're just part of an assembly line checking tasks off a list. Also, they should know where they fit in the company vision. So what does a high engagement job look like? To answer this, we need to balance 2 factors: demand and control. If the job's not demanding enough, it becomes boring. If the job is very demanding, but the person has 0 control over how it gets done, they become frustrated and unfulfilled. Or if they're micromanaged, the result is the same. As Lindsay McGregor writes in Prime to Perform, all too often when someone starts a job, we slap a rule book on their desk with a strong warning to never step out of bounds. This leads to frustration and a lack of fulfillment in a job. If you have to work under those rigid standards, then you tend to be frustrated and unfulfilled. So in job design, or analyzing current positions for that matter, we have to consider 2 questions. How can I create more freedom and autonomy in this position? And how can a person grow into it? See, a great job not only supports the vision and fits into the culture, which is a fundamental component of a great job, but it's also one where the person is trusted with the outcome and not just held to a rigorous set of steps, where they have freedom and autonomy and accomplishment. Those 2 aspects make a great job. Job description is created with these things in mind. Vision and culture of the company is inherent in it, and it draws to us the right candidates. When we create a job, It should have an accurate description, but it also should include what the vision and the culture of the company is. This is the process by which we first start the engagement process, and that is drawing in the right candidates. And hopefully, at this point, we're faced with a pile of qualified resumes. And that leads us really to the second point, and that's resume review. Now, the first thing we look at when we talk about resumes, now, there's a whole science to this, right? And we have to look at certain things that are prerequisites and qualifications. But I'm not talking about that here. What I'm talking about here is what can we identify in that resume as it relates to future engagement by this employee, as it relates to the engagement of the employee, supporting our vision and supporting our culture. So when we look at education and experience and we sort of excise out the qualifying or disqualifying factors, what we want to look for is where are they coming from? And what was the culture like there? Did they come from an environment that's similar to the one we're hiring for? Did they come from something so dramatically different that we're worried that they're going to be able to assimilate here? Once we've identified the resumes that qualify and that we want to bring in now for an interview, well, the interview process really is where rubber meets the road, right? So if I can make any suggestion to you, this should be a more free-flowing conversation. Absolutely, there are going to be questions that have to get asked. They're going to be the standard questions that every interview process includes. But when you're interviewing, I would really consider this as an opportunity to communicate, to connect to an individual. When you form a connection with an individual in a communication, in a conversation, they feel like they're talking to a friend. So you'll get those unguarded moments of openness is what we desire, right? And it's okay to ask, do I like this person? So we can structure questions also that not only speak to experience, but also speak to past cultural experiences. For instance, in your old job, did you work more individually? Did you work more part of team projects? And then has that fit into our culture? Do you like freedom or do you like structure? Do you like to focus on tasks or are you more results oriented, not really concerned with the specific regimen for getting there? And then again, how does that fit into our job description and ultimately our culture? And will they remain engaged in our environment? The interview is also a time to make sure candidates have a true understanding of, one, the position they're being hired for. Let's make sure it's very clear. And again, if we go back to description, there should have been communication between the person who wrote the description and the supervisor, the manager, who is going to oversee the individual who's hired for that position. Then also, do they have an understanding of what the culture is and the company vision is? It's a really good time to see what their understanding of the organization is. Of course, there are so many other things we assess during an interview, but for purposes of our discussion here, these are some of the things that we should consider as it relates to initial employee engagement and assessing whether or not they will become a good fit with our culture. Now that we've hired this individual, it's time for the onboarding process. This is perhaps the first and most important opportunity to win their heart and their mind. Experts say that this is the magic moment when people choose to engage or to disengage. Many times the onboarding process is foisting a pile of paperwork on the new employee. Other times it's overwhelming them with employee orientation material. In this type of onboarding process, people die a slow death, either being crushed by a mountain of paperwork or a painful orientation process. And what does this process say about our culture? Is it bureaucratic? Is it overly rigid? Is it unorganized? Is it poorly managed? People will make this assessment at that time. When they first come into the organization and this onboarding process shows lack of structure, poor organization, that it's poorly managed, this is the time that they're going to make the assessment, probably the overall assessment, about the company. This, in fact, should be the time that you make an emotional connection with the individual. It's, in fact, the time you should start really engaging the individual. This is also the time to set the employee up for success, to sell the culture and the vision of the organization. It's important to note that nearly 1/3 of employees hired leave in the first 6 months. That's a horrible statistic for anybody that has to hire because it's such a laborious and long process. So what does a successful onboarding process look like? First, it has to be efficient, it has to be organized, and it has to be streamlined. It should only include those things that are necessary in the very beginning of the process. and not overwhelm an individual with needless paperwork or needless information that can be conveyed in a smoother fashion at a later time. If you're not a convert yet, consider these statistics. 69% of employees are more likely to stay with a company for 3 years if they experienced a great onboarding process. New employees who went through a structured onboarding program were 58% more likely to be with an organization after 3 years also. Organizations with a standard onboarding process experience 50% greater new hire productivity. If those statistics don't convince you that an efficient onboarding process has an impact not only on employee retention, but on employee productivity, I'm not sure how else I can convince you. Because to me, even being in this industry for a while, I was surprised when I researched those statistics. Let me give you some additional tips as well. I always suggest that you train and involve the direct line supervisors, managers, and department heads who are going to ultimately be responsible for this new individual. Train them in the onboarding process and involve them in the onboarding process. This is a great chance for them to make an initial connection with their new hire. The first time they meet the new hire should not be at the time when that person starts the job. The onboarding process is really the time to involve that supervisor. It's also a time for that supervisor to passionately explain what their department does and how that fits into the overall mission and culture of the organization. Work with these folks to provide a consistent onboarding process, consistency and efficiency in the process. Remember that old adage, and it really holds true here. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Everybody, when they walk in that door, passes judgment. It's one of the things we do as human beings. So we need to take that opportunity to make sure that that first impression is a good one. This is a great time to talk about the company's history, its evolution, the longevity and commitment of some of the employees, its future vision. You know, I worked with a nonprofit recently, and prior to going in there and doing a workshop in their environment, one of the things I was most struck by, because I do a lot of research on a company before I go in, because I want to know the type of people I'm speaking to and try to get a handle on their environment. One of the things I noticed about this particular organization, the lowest amount of time that an employee was there was 4 years. I was speaking to 15 employees. The company is much larger than that, but the 15 leaders that I was speaking to, the least amount of experience in the room was 4 years. Everybody else was in the teens. That tells me something about culture. That tells me something about loyalty and commitment and employee engagement. This is the time to sell the new hire on the heart of the company during that onboarding process. Well, these are just a few tips I can give you on beginning the engagement process. Remember, it begins even before we hire. It begins when we describe that job, when we create that job. And then it goes to the hiring process. And it continues through the interview and, more importantly, or equally as important, I should say, the onboarding process. And these methods can be used regardless of company size. Whether you have a big HR department or whether you're a small company, you can use the same methods. I will cover this and other topics in much more depth during the longer workshop that I offer at the end of each quarter. In the meantime, though, we still have 2 more topics on employee engagement left in this quarter. In May, we're going to talk about creating a thriving working environment. In June, we're going to talk about leading towards your vision. I really hope you join me for both of those. I wish you all the success in the world, and I hope to see you in the future. Thanks so much for joining me.